The windshield wipers on my Ford F-150 could barely keep up with the freezing rain that had been falling for the past 3 hours, and I knew this January storm in Columbus, Ohio, was about to get a whole lot worse. I pulled into my designated parking spot outside my townhome at the Meadowbrook Commons development, the same spot I'd been parking in for the last 5 years without a single issue. The weather forecast had been talking about this storm all week, and as fire chief for the Columbus Fire Department, I'd already put my entire team on high alert. What I didn't expect was the encounter that was about to unfold in my own neighborhood. I grabbed my work bag from the passenger seat and was about to head inside when I noticed a woman marching toward my truck. She was bundled up in an expensive-looking cream-colored parka, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she had that particular expression I'd come to recognize over the years. The HOA president, Brenda Patterson, was on a mission. I rolled down my window halfway, letting in a blast of freezing air. "Evening, Brenda. Everything okay?" "No, Ethan, everything is not okay." Her voice had that clipped tone that meant she was gearing up for something. "I need to borrow your ice scraper immediately." I blinked, trying to process what she'd just said. "My ice scraper?" "Yes, your ice scraper. My car is completely frozen over and I have an emergency HOA board meeting in 20 minutes at Susan's house. This storm has created all sorts of violations that need to be addressed immediately." I glanced at my dashboard where my heavy-duty ice scraper sat. It was a good one, the kind with a thick blade and a foam grip that I'd had for years. "Brenda, it's freezing rain. Maybe the meeting could wait until tomorrow when the storm passes." Her eyes narrowed. "The HOA doesn't stop operating because of a little weather, Ethan. As residents of Meadowbrook Commons, we all need to do our part. Now, I'm requiring you to lend me that ice scraper. It's the neighborly thing to do." Requiring, I felt my jaw tighten. "Look, I need to keep my scraper in my truck. I'm on call for emergencies, and with this weather, I'll likely need it tonight." "On call for what? You work in an office, don't you? Some administrative job?" Brenda's tone dripped with dismissiveness. "I'm sure whatever emails you need to answer can wait. My HOA responsibilities are time-sensitive." This wasn't the first time Brenda had made assumptions about what I did for work. I kept a low profile in the neighborhood, didn't talk much about my job, and usually left for work in plain clothes before changing at the station. The townhome had been my refuge after my divorce 3 years ago, a place where I could just be Ethan Xavier, regular guy, not Fire Chief Xavier. "Actually, I work for the fire department," I said evenly. "And in weather like this, emergency calls spike. I need my equipment." Brenda waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure the fire department has plenty of ice scrapers. Look, I don't have time to argue. The HOA bylaws clearly state that residents must assist in maintaining community standards, and right now, my ability to conduct official HOA business is being impeded by ice on my vehicle. Hand over the scraper, and I'll return it after the meeting." The freezing rain continued to pelt down, creating a rhythmic drumming on the roof of my truck. I could feel my phone buzzing in my pocket, probably the station checking in about the weather conditions. "Brenda, I'm going to have to decline. I need my scraper for work. There's a gas station 2 blocks down that sells them." Her face flushed red, visible even in the dim parking lot lighting. "You're refusing a direct request from your HOA president. Do you know how many violations I could write you up for? Let me think. Your truck is parked slightly over the line. That's a violation right there. $50 fine." I looked at my truck. It was perfectly within the lines. "Brenda, my truck is parked fine." "That's your opinion. I say it's over the line, And is that a work decal on your back window? Commercial vehicle parking isn't allowed in resident spots. That's another $100 fine. The decal she was referring to was a small Columbus Fire Department sticker, barely 3 inches across, that I'd put on years ago. It wasn't commercial vehicle signage by any stretch. That's not a commercial vehicle marker. It's a department sticker. Looks commercial to me. And your truck bed has ice melt in it. Storage of commercial quantities of chemical substances in residential parking areas. Another violation. We're up to $250 now, Ethan. Want to keep going, or do you want to hand over that scraper? My phone buzzed again. This time I pulled it out. It was Jim, my deputy chief. I need to take this, I told Brenda. We're not done here, she snapped. I answered the phone. Xavier here. Chief, we've got reports coming in about ice accumulation on power lines throughout the city. Fire risk is elevated. The mayor's office is coordinating with all emergency services. You need to come in. On my way in 10, I said and hung up. Brenda was still standing there, her arms crossed. So, the scraper. Brenda, I just got called into work. I'm heading to the station right now. I really don't have time for this. Make time. I'm not moving until you give me that scraper. I stared at her for a long moment, then made a decision. I grabbed the ice scraper from my dashboard and opened the door, forcing Brenda to step back. The freezing rain immediately soaked into my jacket. Fine, take it, but I need it back tonight. I'm serious about needing it for work. Brenda snatched the scraper from my hand with a triumphant expression. See, was that so hard? I'll get it back to you when I'm done, probably tomorrow sometime. Tonight, Brenda, I need it tonight. We'll see, she said, already walking away toward a silver Lexus SUV parked 3 spots down. And don't think I'm forgetting about those violations. You'll be getting a notice in the mail. I watched her go, shaking my head in disbelief. 5 years in this development, and Brenda had been president for the last 2. The HOA had become increasingly aggressive under her leadership, with fines for everything from garbage cans being visible from the street to lawn grass being a 1/4 inch too long. But this was a new level of absurdity. I got back in my truck and headed to the fire station, my windshield already starting to freeze over without the scraper to clear it properly. I had to use my wipers and defroster on maximum, and visibility was terrible. The drive that should have taken 15 minutes took 30, and by the time I pulled into the station, I was already dealing with the first emergency calls of the night. The next 12 hours were chaos. We responded to 4 car accidents, 2 structure fires caused by faulty space heaters, and 1 medical emergency when an elderly man slipped on ice and broke his hip. The freezing rain didn't let up until nearly 6 in the morning, leaving Columbus coated in a thick layer of ice that made every surface treacherous. By the time I finally headed home at 8 that morning, I was exhausted. My uniform was smoke-stained, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, but the temperature was still well below freezing, keeping everything locked in ice. I pulled into my parking spot at Meadowbrook Commons and immediately noticed something that made my fatigue evaporate. There was a bright orange violation notice stuck to my front door. I grabbed it and read the contents. Violation notice. Resident Ethan Xavier of Unit 247. Violation 1. Commercial vehicle parking in residential zone. Fine, $100. Violation 2. Storage of commercial materials in residential parking area. Fine, $100. Violation 3. Vehicle parked in marked space in manner inconsistent with designated boundaries. Fine, $50. Total due, $250. Payment due within 15 days. Failure to pay will result in additional penalties and potential lien on property. I crumpled the notice in my fist. This was ridiculous, but I was too tired to deal with it right then. I needed sleep. The scraper situation could wait. I managed about 4 hours of sleep before my phone woke me up. It was a number I didn't recognize with a Columbus area code. "Hello, is this Ethan Xavier?" A woman's voice, professional and crisp. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Patricia from Meadowbrook Commons Management Company. I'm calling regarding several complaints that have been filed against your property." I sat up in bed, running a hand through my hair. "Complaints? What complaints?" "The HOA president, Mrs. Patterson, has filed formal complaints regarding vehicle violations, improper parking, and failure to comply with HOA requests. She's requesting an expedited hearing to address these issues and determine if further action is warranted." Further action. Potential towing of your vehicle and additional fines. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow evening at 6 at the community center. Your attendance is mandatory per the HOA bylaws. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Fine, I'll be there." "Can I ask what specific HOA bylaws I'm supposedly violating?" "That will be addressed at the hearing, Mr. Xavier. Please bring any documentation you feel is relevant to your case." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone in disbelief. This was happening because I wouldn't give up my ice scraper. No, it was bigger than that. This was about control. Brenda ran the HOA like her personal fiefdom, and anyone who didn't fall in line got targeted. I got up and made coffee, my mind already working through the situation. I'd dealt with plenty of difficult people in my career, from homeowners who refused to evacuate during fires to city council members who wanted to cut department funding. But there was something particularly grating about HOA power trips. My phone rang again. This time it was Jim from the station. "Chief, how are you holding up?" "Been better." "What's up?" "We've got a community outreach event scheduled for next week. The mayor wants all department heads doing public events to boost the city's emergency preparedness profile. You're scheduled for a meet and greet at the Northside Community Center on Tuesday. Then you're doing a presentation at the Columbus Convention Center on Thursday about fire safety in extreme weather. Send me the details. I'll be there." "Will do." Also, the City Council wants a report on last night's emergency responses. They're concerned about resource allocation. I'll have it on their desks by Monday. We talked through a few more operational details before hanging up. I spent the rest of the afternoon catching up on paperwork and trying not to think about the absurd HOA situation. By evening, I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood despite the icy conditions. I needed to clear my head. Meadowbrook Commons was a sprawling development of townhomes and single-family houses built about 15 years ago. It was nice enough, with well-maintained common areas, a small park, and a community center that hosted HOA meetings and neighborhood events. The HOA fees were steep, nearly $400 a month, but that supposedly covered landscaping, snow removal, and maintenance of common areas. As I walked past the community center, I saw lights on inside. Curious, I approached and glanced through the window. Brenda was there with several other board members, and they appeared to be in an intense discussion. On the table in front of them, I could see printed photographs. I moved closer, trying to see what they were looking at. The photos were of houses in the neighborhood. Various houses with minor issues. A lawn ornament here, a slightly weathered mailbox there, holiday decorations that were apparently a few days past the HOA's removal deadline. My truck was in several of the photos, from different angles, with measurements marked on them. She had been documenting my parking spot, building a case against me. I stepped away from the window before anyone noticed me and continued my walk. This was more serious than I'd thought. Brenda wasn't just being petty about the ice scraper. She was conducting a systematic campaign. When I got back to my townhome, I found my ice scraper leaning against my front door. No note, no apology, just the scraper. I picked it up and examined it. The blade was chipped in 2 places, like someone had been using it to hammer away at thick ice. It was basically ruined. I took a photo of the damaged scraper and went inside. If Brenda wanted to play documentation games, I could do that too. The next evening, I arrived at the community center at 5:45, dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt. I brought a folder with printouts of the HOA bylaws. I'd spent the afternoon reading. Photos of my parking spot from multiple angles, and documentation of my position with the Columbus Fire Department. The hearing room was set up like a miniature courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and chairs arranged in rows for attendees. Besides Brenda, there were 4 other board members, 2 men and 2 women, all probably in their 50s or 60s. A handful of other residents sat in the audience, apparently there to watch the proceedings. Brenda called the meeting to order at exactly 6 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. We have several items on tonight's agenda, but first, we need to address the matter of violations by resident Ethan Xavier. Mr. Xavier, please come forward. I walked to the front and stood facing the board. Brenda arranged some papers in front of her. Mr. Xavier, you've been cited for multiple violations of Meadowbrook Commons HOA bylaws. These include parking a commercial vehicle in a residential zone, storing commercial materials in a residential parking area, and improper parking within your designated space. How do you plead? How do I plead? This isn't a court, Brenda. This is an official HOA hearing, and you will address me as Mrs. Patterson or Madam President. Now, do you contest these violations? Yes, I contest all of them. None of them are valid. One of the other board members, an older man with gray hair, spoke up. Mr. Xavier, we have photographic evidence of your vehicle in violation of multiple bylaws. Are you saying the photographs are inaccurate? I'm saying the interpretation of those photographs is wrong. My truck is not a commercial vehicle. It's my personal vehicle that I use to commute to work. Brenda pulled out a large printed photo and held it up. This decal on your rear window clearly identifies your vehicle as belonging to the fire department. That makes it a commercial vehicle. That's a 3-inch department sticker, not commercial vehicle signage. By that logic, anyone with a college alumni sticker or a sports team decal would be parking a commercial vehicle. The bylaw states that vehicles used for commercial purposes or displaying commercial markings are prohibited in residential parking areas. Brenda continued. Your vehicle clearly displays commercial markings. I pulled out my own copy of the bylaws. The bylaw actually states clearly marked commercial vehicles such as work trucks, vans with company logos, or vehicles with commercial license plates. A small departmental sticker doesn't meet that criteria. Another board member, a woman with short red hair, leaned forward. Mr. Xavier, what exactly do you do for work? I'm the fire chief for the Columbus Fire Department. The room went quiet. Brenda's expression flickered with something surprise, maybe concern before settling back into her stern mask. That doesn't change the nature of the violations, Brenda said. If anything, it confirms that your vehicle is used for official business, making it a commercial vehicle. No, it makes it a personal vehicle I drive to work, just like every other resident here who drives to their job. The fire department doesn't own my truck. I do. I bought it with my own money. I pay the insurance and registration, and I use it as my personal transportation. The only thing that connects it to the fire department is a small sticker. The gray-haired man spoke again. What about the ice melt in your truck bed? Mrs. Patterson indicated you're storing commercial quantities of chemical substances. I almost laughed. I have 2 bags of ice melt that I keep for my personal use on my walkway and steps. That's hardly commercial storage. That's being prepared for weather like we just had. The bylaw is clear about storage of chemical substances, Brenda interjected. The bylaw refers to hazardous chemical storage in quantities that pose a safety risk. Ice melt purchased from any hardware store in bags designed for consumer use is not a hazardous chemical in commercial quantities. This back and forth continued for another 20 minutes. Brenda brought up the parking space alignment, claiming my truck was over the line. I presented my photos showing the truck clearly within the boundaries. She claimed my truck was too large for the space. I pointed out that the bylaws had no restrictions on vehicle size as long as it fit within the marked space, which mine did. Finally, the red-haired board member held up a hand. I think we need to take a recess to discuss this matter as a board. Mr. Xavier, please wait outside. I stepped out into the hallway, and several residents who'd been watching the hearing followed me out. That was ridiculous, one man said. He was maybe 40, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. I'm Dave Mosley from Unit 189. Brenda tried to fine me last year because she didn't like the color I painted my front door, even though it was one of the approved colors from the bylaw list. A younger woman joined in. She tried to make me remove my bird feeder, said it was attracting vermin. I had to threaten to get a lawyer before she backed off. Over the next 10 minutes, I heard story after story about Brenda's overreach as HOA president. Apparently, I wasn't the first person she'd targeted, just the latest. The pattern was clear. She used her position to bully residents into compliance with demands that went far beyond the actual bylaws. After about 15 minutes, I was called back into the hearing room. The board members looked uncomfortable, except for Brenda, who maintained her stern expression. The gray-haired man cleared his throat. Mr. Xavier, after reviewing the evidence and bylaws, the board has decided to reduce your fines. The commercial vehicle violation is dismissed, as is the chemical storage violation. However, we are upholding the parking alignment violation. Your fine is reduced to $50. Based on what? I asked. I showed you photos proving my truck was properly parked. Mrs. Patterson provided testimony that she observed your vehicle over the line on multiple occasions. The board finds her testimony credible. I felt anger rising in my chest. So despite photographic evidence to the contrary, you're taking her word for it, Brenda smiled slightly. The board has made its decision, Mr. Xavier. You have 15 days to pay the fine. This hearing is concluded. Actually, it's not, I said. I pulled out another document from my folder. I'm filing a formal complaint against Mrs. Patterson for harassment and abuse of authority. Brenda's smile vanished. Excuse me. You demanded my personal property, an ice scraper, under threat of HOA violations if I refused. When I eventually complied to avoid further harassment, you damaged my property and failed to return it in the condition it was given. Then you filed retaliatory violations against me. This is textbook harassment and abuse of your position. The red-haired board member looked at Brenda. Is this true? Did you demand his ice scraper? I asked to borrow it for official HOA business. He initially refused, demonstrating a lack of community spirit. Official HOA business, I said. You needed to get to a board meeting to discuss violations. That's not an emergency that required commandeering a resident's personal property. I didn't commandeer anything. You gave it to me willingly. after you threatened me with violations and fines if I didn't comply." The gray-haired man held up his hands. "This is getting off track. Mr. Xavier, you can file a formal complaint in writing with the management company. They'll investigate and report back to the board. I want it on record right now that I'm filing this complaint, and I want to know what the process is for removing a board member who abuses their authority." Brenda stood up. "How dare you? I have served this community for 2 years, maintaining our standards and property values. Just because you don't want to follow the rules doesn't mean I'm abusing anything. The rules you selectively enforce. The rules you interpret in whatever way supports your personal agenda." The hearing devolved into chaos after that, with several residents from the audience chiming in with their own complaints about Brenda. The board eventually called an end to the meeting, stating they would review everything and follow up in writing. As people filed out, Dave Mosley approached me. "Hey, a bunch of us have been talking about trying to recall Brenda from the board. We might have enough votes if we can get organized. Would you be interested in helping?" "Absolutely," I said. "This has gone on long enough." We exchanged contact information, and I headed home feeling slightly better about the situation. At least I wasn't alone in dealing with Brenda's behavior. Over the next week, things escalated. I received another violation notice in the mail, this time for creating a disturbance during an official HOA hearing. The fine was $100. I also got a letter from the management company stating that my complaint against Brenda had been received and would be investigated, but the process could take up to 60 days. Meanwhile, Dave organized a meeting at his house with about 15 residents who were all fed up with the HOA's aggressive tactics under Brenda's leadership. We went through the bylaws and discovered that we could petition for a recall election if we got signatures from 30% of the homeowners. Meadowbrook Commons had 240 units, so we needed 72 signatures. "That's doable," Dave said. "There are at least that many people who have been fined or harassed by Brenda in the last 2 years." We split up the development and started going door to door collecting signatures. The response was overwhelming. People were eager to sign, and many had their own horror stories about dealing with Brenda. Within a week, we had 97 signatures, but Brenda wasn't sitting idle. I started noticing her driving through the neighborhood more frequently, and several people reported that she'd been taking photos of their properties, apparently looking for violations. 3 residents who'd signed the recall petition received violation notices for minor issues like mailbox paint fading or house numbers being slightly off-center. It was obvious intimidation, and it backfired. More people signed the petition in response. 2 weeks after the hearing, I was at the fire station when I got a call from Dave. "Ethan, you need to see this. Can you come to the community center? What's going on? Just come. You'll want to see it in person." I drove over to the community center and found Dave standing in the parking lot with about a dozen other residents. They were all looking at something on the building's exterior wall. Someone had spray-painted graffiti on the wall. It wasn't particularly creative, just crude insults and profanity. But that wasn't what had everyone's attention. "Look at the security camera," Dave said, pointing up. The community center had a security camera mounted above the entrance. It was pointing directly at the parking lot and should have captured whoever vandalized the wall. "Did anyone check the footage?" I asked. "Building's locked," Dave said. "Only board members have keys. But here's the thing. We've got a timeline. The graffiti wasn't here this morning. I walked past at 7, but it was here by noon when Jenny drove by." "Between 7 and noon on a Tuesday," I said. "The camera would have caught it." "Unless someone disabled the camera first," Dave suggested. We called the police non-emergency line to report the vandalism. An officer showed up about 30 minutes later, took statements, and tried to access the security footage. The system was locked with a password that only the board president had. "We'll need to contact the board president to get access," the officer said, writing in his notebook. "That's Brenda Patterson," I told him. "I'll give you her number." The officer called Brenda, spoke with her briefly, then hung up looking frustrated. "She says she's out of town for the rest of the week and doesn't feel comfortable giving out the security password over the phone. She'll review the footage when she returns." "She's out of town," Dave said. "Her car was at her house this morning." The officer made a note of that. "I'll follow up with her. In the meantime, is there a property manager who might have access?" We gave him the management company's information, and he said he'd pursue it. But I had a sinking feeling this wasn't going to go anywhere quickly. Over the next few days, the situation in the neighborhood became increasingly tense. More graffiti appeared, this time on the sign at the entrance to the development. Then someone dumped a load of garbage in the community park. Each incident was during daytime hours when the security cameras should have caught the perpetrator. But accessing the footage remained impossible because Brenda claimed she didn't have time to review it. The recall petition was submitted to the management company with 112 signatures, well over the required threshold. According to the bylaws, a recall election had to be held within 30 days of receiving a valid petition. Brenda responded by calling an emergency board meeting to address security concerns in the neighborhood. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and I made sure to attend. The community center was packed. It seemed like half the development had shown up. Brenda stood at the front with the other board members, looking stern and composed. "Thank you all for coming," Brenda began. "As you're aware, we've experienced several incidents of vandalism recently. This is unacceptable and represents a serious decline in community standards. Maybe if we could see the security footage, we'd know who's doing it," someone called out from the audience. "The security system has been experiencing technical difficulties," Brenda said smoothly. "We're working with a technician to resolve the issues." "That's not what the police report says," Dave stood up. "According to the officer's report, the system is working fine. You just won't provide the password. I will not be bullied into compromising our community security by handing out passwords to anyone who demands them." "The police aren't anyone," I said. "They're investigating criminal activity." Brenda's eyes fixed on me. "Mr. Xavier, how interesting that these incidents started happening right around the time you filed your baseless complaint against me and began organizing a recall effort." The room went silent. "Are you suggesting I'm the one vandalizing the community?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "I'm suggesting it's suspicious timing. I'm the fire chief. I don't have time to vandalize anything, and I certainly don't have a motive. You, on the other hand, have a very clear motive to create chaos and fear to distract from the recall petition. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Xavier, and so is yours. The difference is mine is based on logical reasoning about who benefits from this situation." The meeting devolved into shouting after that. Residents were angry. Accusations flew in multiple directions, and the board eventually ended the meeting early, citing an inability to maintain order. As I was leaving, a younger woman I didn't recognize approached me. She looked nervous, kept glancing around like she was afraid of being seen. "Chief Xavier, can I talk to you privately?" We walked to the far side of the parking lot, away from everyone else. "I'm Amanda Chen. I live in Unit 302. She pulled out her phone. "I need to show you something, but I'm scared. If Brenda finds out I'm talking to you, she'll come after me next." "What is it?" She pulled up a video on her phone. I have a doorbell camera. My unit faces the community center at an angle. My camera caught something yesterday morning." She played the video. It was time-stamped at 6:47 a.m. the previous day. In the video, I could see Brenda's silver Lexus SUV pull up to the community center. Brenda got out, looked around, then pulled something from her trunk. She walked to the side of the building, out of the camera's frame, for about 3 minutes. When she returned, she was no longer carrying whatever she'd taken from her trunk. She got back in her SUV and drove away. "That's when the second graffiti appeared," Amanda said quietly. "The stuff on the entrance sign. I didn't want to believe it, but the timeline matches perfectly. Can you send me this video? I already sent it to the police through their tip line. Anonymously. But I wanted you to know too, because you're fighting her, and people like you need to know what she's really doing." "This is important evidence, Amanda. Thank you." She nodded and hurried away, still looking nervous. I stood in the parking lot for a long time after that, processing what I'd just seen. Brenda was staging vandalism incidents to create fear and chaos in the community, probably hoping it would derail the recall effort by making people think opposition to her leadership was causing problems. My phone rang. It was Jim from the station. "Chief, we've got a situation. There's a fire at a commercial building on Morse Road. Looks like it might be arson. We need you here." "On my way." I pushed the HOA drama out of my mind and headed to the scene. The next several hours were consumed with fire suppression, investigation coordination, and witness interviews. By the time I got home, it was after midnight, and I was too exhausted to think about anything except sleep. The next morning, I woke to my phone ringing. It was a detective from the Columbus Police Department. "Chief Xavier. This is Detective Maria Gonzalez with CPD. I'm investigating the vandalism incidents at Meadowbrook Commons. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course." We received an anonymous tip with video evidence that appears to show the HOA president, Brenda Patterson, at the scene of one of the incidents during the time frame when it occurred. "I understand you've had some conflicts with Mrs. Patterson recently." I explained the entire situation, from the ice scraper incident to the violation notices to the recall petition. Detective Gonzalez listened carefully, asking questions occasionally. "I need to ask you directly, Chief Xavier. Have you or anyone acting on your behalf engaged in any vandalism of HOA property?" "Absolutely not. I'm a fire chief. I enforce laws and safety regulations. I don't break them." "That's what I figured, but I had to ask. Based on the evidence we've gathered, including the video footage from Miss Chen's doorbell camera, we have probable cause to obtain a warrant for Mrs. Patterson's home and vehicle. We're also getting a warrant to access the community center's security system directly." "What are you looking for?" "Evidence of vandalism supplies. Spray paint cans with matching colors, and we want to see if she deleted or altered any security footage. There's also the matter of filing false police reports if she reported these incidents knowing she was responsible for them." "She didn't actually file reports herself. Other residents reported them." "True, but she's been vocal in board meetings about the incidents and has used them to justify her actions as president. If we can prove she staged them, that opens up potential charges for fraud, filing false instrument, and vandalism itself." The detective thanked me for my time and said she'd be in touch. I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee, trying to wrap my head around how far Brenda had taken this. Vandalism and fraud to maintain control of a homeowners association. It seemed insane. 3 days later, I was at work when Dave called me, his voice excited. "Ethan, they arrested Brenda." "What, when?" "About an hour ago. Cops showed up at her house with a warrant, searched the place, and took her away in handcuffs. Everyone's talking about it. Do we know what they found? Not officially, but the police took several bags of evidence out of her garage. And get this, the security footage that was supposedly inaccessible. Once they got direct access to the system, they found she'd been regularly deleting footage, but she wasn't tech-savvy enough to know that deleted footage on that type of system doesn't actually disappear right away. It stays in a buffer for 30 days unless you completely overwrite it. So they recovered footage of her vandalizing the property. That's what people are saying. I don't have confirmation, but yeah, she got caught. The next few days were a whirlwind. The local news picked up the story because it involved a public official, me, being targeted by an HOA president who then staged crimes to maintain power. The phrase HOA corruption scandal got thrown around a lot, and suddenly Meadowbrook Commons was notorious. Brenda was charged with multiple counts of criminal mischief, vandalism, filing a false instrument, and obstruction of justice for deleting security footage. The management company immediately suspended her from the board pending the outcome of the criminal case, and the remaining board members called an emergency meeting. The meeting was held the following Tuesday, and I attended along with what seemed like every other resident in the development. The red-haired board member, whose name was Susan Harper, chaired the meeting. First, I want to apologize on behalf of the board for what has transpired, Susan began. We should have been more vigilant in overseeing Mrs. Patterson's activities. Many of you, including Mr. Xavier, were treated unjustly, and that's on us as much as it is on her. The gray-haired man, Tom Mitchell, spoke next. Effective immediately, all fines issued by Mrs. Patterson in the past 6 months are under review. If you believe you were fined unfairly, please submit a written request for review to the management company. We'll be reassessing every single one. They also announced that the recall petition was now moot, since Brenda was no longer serving as president. But they would still be holding a special election to fill her position, and to vote on several bylaw amendments to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. Over the following weeks, the investigation into Brenda's activities expanded. It turned out she'd been doing more than just staging vandalism. The police discovered she'd been embezzling HOA funds, small amounts at first but increasing over time, totaling nearly $30,000 over 2 years. She'd been using her position to approve her own expense reimbursements for things that had nothing to do with HOA business. The prosecutor added embezzlement and theft charges to her case. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution wasn't interested in being lenient given the scope of her crimes and the number of people she'd victimized. The trial took place 4 months later. I had to testify about the ice scraper incident, the violations she'd issued, and the harassment I'd experienced. So did about a dozen other residents who had similar stories. Amanda Chen testified about her doorbell camera footage. The prosecution presented recovered security footage showing Brenda vandalizing the community center and entrance sign. The defense tried to paint Brenda as a dedicated volunteer who'd been stressed by the demands of the position and had made some poor choices. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury wasn't sympathetic. Brenda was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered her to pay full restitution of the embezzled funds plus damages for the vandalism. She was also banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in Ohio for 10 years. In the aftermath, Meadowbrook Commons underwent significant changes. The special election resulted in a completely new board, including Dave Mosley as president. One of their first acts was to pass new bylaws limiting the president's unilateral authority, requiring board approval for any fines over $25, and establishing a resident ombudsman position to handle complaints about board actions. All the fines Brenda had issued against me were dismissed and refunded. The board even sent me a formal letter of apology for the harassment I'd endured. The ice scraper, my damaged ice scraper that started this whole mess, became something of a neighborhood legend. Dave suggested I should mount it on a plaque as a reminder of what happens when HOA power goes unchecked. I laughed but kept it in my garage, a reminder to myself that standing up to bullies, even ones with official titles, was worth it. Life at Meadowbrook Commons improved dramatically. The new board focused on actual community building rather than rules enforcement. They organized neighborhood events, properly maintained the common areas, and treated residents like people rather than subjects to be controlled. I kept my role as fire chief relatively quiet, though after the trial and the news coverage, most people in the neighborhood knew who I was and what I did. A few residents even came to the station for tours, and we started doing fire safety presentations at the community center. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after Brenda's sentencing, I was washing my truck in my parking spot when Dave walked over with a couple of beers. "Thought you might want one of these," he said, offering me a bottle. "Thanks." I took the beer and leaned against my truck. "How's the president job treating you? It's work, but at least I'm not trying to fine people for having the wrong shade of beige on their shutters." He laughed. "Seriously, though, I wanted to thank you again for standing up to Brenda. A lot of us were scared to push back against her. Someone had to. She crossed a line when she tried to use her position to force me to give up my property. Over an ice scraper. Still can't believe that's what set this whole thing off. It wasn't really about the ice scraper, it was about control. She couldn't stand that someone told her no." Dave nodded thoughtfully. "True. You know what's crazy? We found records showing she'd been planning to try to get you evicted. She was building a case claiming you were running some kind of business out of your home based on the fact that you work odd hours and sometimes come home in your uniform." Evicted? She couldn't evict me. She couldn't, but she could make the process so expensive and difficult that you might have decided it wasn't worth fighting. That's what she did to the Hendersons in Unit 412. They eventually sold and moved rather than keep dealing with her. I shook my head. "That's horrible." "Yeah, but it's over now, and we've got actual functioning HOA that works for the residents instead of against them." We stood there for a while, drinking our beers and watching kids play in the neighborhood park. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the development. It looked peaceful, like a community should look. My phone buzzed with an alert from the station about a training exercise scheduled for Monday. I checked it quickly and put the phone away. "You ever think about getting involved with the board?" Dave asked. "We could use someone with your leadership experience." "I think I'll pass," I said with a laugh. "I've got enough on my plate with the department, but if you need advice or support, I'm always around." "Fair enough." We finished our beers and Dave headed back to his unit. I went inside my townhome and looked around. It was a good place, a home I'd built for myself after my divorce. The HOA drama had threatened that peace, but standing up to it had been the right choice. Later that evening, I got an email from the management company. It was a newsletter about community updates. The new board had started a monthly communication to keep residents informed about decisions and finances. Everything was transparent now, a stark contrast to how things had been under Brenda. I thought about that morning in the ice storm, standing in the freezing rain arguing with Brenda about an ice scraper. If someone had told me then that the interaction would lead to uncovering embezzlement, fraud, and a criminal conviction, I would have thought they were crazy. But that's how these things work sometimes. One person standing up to a bully can unravel an entire corrupt system. My career as fire chief had taught me a lot about leadership, crisis management, and standing firm under pressure. But dealing with the HOA situation had been its own kind of test. There's something uniquely frustrating about petty tyranny in a place where you're supposed to feel at home. The funny thing was, Brenda probably thought her position made her untouchable. She'd gotten away with overstepping her authority for so long that she started believing she could do anything. The ice scraper demand was just her being careless, assuming I'd comply like everyone else had. But I'd spent 25 years in the fire service, working my way up from a rookie firefighter to chief. I'd faced down burning buildings, made life or death decisions, and dealt with politicians who thought emergency services were places to cut budgets. A HOA president on a power trip wasn't going to intimidate me. The next morning, I went for a run through the neighborhood. It was a beautiful Sunday, clear and cool, perfect running weather. As I passed the community center, I noticed the graffiti had been completely cleaned and the building had been repainted. The new board had taken care of it within weeks of taking over. Several residents waved as I ran past. The neighborhood felt different now, lighter somehow. People weren't walking around afraid of being fined for minor infractions. They were actually using the common areas, letting their kids play outside, decorating their homes for holidays without fear. That's what an HOA was supposed to do, create a pleasant community where people wanted to live, not rule through fear and intimidation. When I got back from my run, I found a handwritten note stuck to my door. It was from Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived in the unit next to mine. Chief Xavier, I wanted to thank you for standing up to Brenda. She fined me 6 times last year for various made-up violations. I was scared to fight back because I'm on a fixed income and couldn't afford legal fees. When you took her on, it gave the rest of us courage. Thank you for your service to the community, both as fire chief and as a neighbor. Margaret Patterson, I stood there holding the note, feeling the weight of it. I hadn't thought about the broader impact of confronting Brenda. I was just defending myself against her harassment. But Margaret was right. Standing up to a bully gives others permission to do the same. I put the note on my refrigerator as a reminder. The following months settled into a comfortable routine. Work at the fire department kept me busy with the usual mix of emergency calls, administrative duties, and community outreach. The new HOA board ran things smoothly, and Meadowbrook Commons became the kind of neighborhood it was always meant to be. I heard through Dave that Brenda's house went into foreclosure. The restitution payments combined with legal fees had bankrupted her. Her husband divorced her while she was serving her sentence. It was a complete fall from grace. Part of me felt bad about that. But then, I'd remember the fear tactics, the embezzlement, the staged crimes, and the systematic harassment of residents who were just trying to live their lives. She'd brought it all on herself through her choices. One evening about a year after the initial ice scraper incident, I was sitting on my small patio grilling dinner when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello. Is this Ethan Xavier?" A woman's voice, uncertain. "Yes, who's calling? My name is Jennifer Torres. I'm on the HOA board for Riverside Estates in Dayton. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from Dave Mosley. We're having some issues with our HOA president, and Dave said you might be able to offer advice on how you handled your situation." I sat back in my chair, watching my steaks sizzle on the grill. "What kind of issues?" She described a situation eerily similar to what had happened at Meadowbrook Commons. An HOA president on a power trip, excessive fines, harassment of residents who question decisions, and financial irregularities. The problem is, we're scared to confront her, Jennifer said. She's threatened to sue several residents for defamation when they questioned her accounting. That's an intimidation tactic, I said. Here's what you need to know: the bylaws are there to protect residents as much as they are there to maintain standards. Start documenting everything. Every interaction, every fine, every threat. Get copies of financial records. In Ohio, HOA members have a legal right to review financial documents. I spent the next 30 minutes walking her through the steps we'd taken, organizing concerned residents, filing formal complaints, collecting signatures for a recall petition, and ultimately involving law enforcement when we discovered criminal activity. The key is not to be afraid, I told her. These people count on intimidation to maintain control. Once you stand up to them, their power disappears. After we hung up, I realized that my experience with Brenda had become a sort of roadmap for other communities dealing with HOA corruption. It was strange to think that something that started with a demand for my ice scraper during a storm had turned into a cautionary tale about unchecked authority in homeowners associations. Dave later told me that 3 other HOAs in the Columbus area had reached out asking about our experience and how we'd reformed our board. Apparently, word had spread through management company networks about what happened at Meadowbrook Commons. The ice storm that had started everything became a distant memory, but its effects rippled forward. The Columbus City Council even started discussing legislation to increase oversight of HOAs and establish clearer processes for residents to challenge board decisions. I was invited to speak at a city council meeting about my experience. I almost declined. I wasn't looking for publicity or to become some kind of HOA reform advocate. But I thought about Margaret Peterson's note and decided to do it. The council chamber was packed the night I testified. Apparently, a lot of people had HOA horror stories they wanted to share. I kept my testimony simple and factual, explained what happened, how the situation escalated, what we discovered, and how we fixed it. The lesson here isn't that all HOAs are corrupt, I concluded. Most board members are volunteers trying to do right by their communities. But without proper oversight and transparency, the potential for abuse is significant. Residents need clear pathways to challenge decisions and remove board members who overstep their authority. Several council members asked questions, and the discussion went on for over an hour. In the end, the council voted to establish a task force to study HOA governance issues and make recommendations for potential reforms. Walking out of that council chamber, I felt like maybe something good had come from the whole mess after all. If the laws changed to protect residents from HOA abuse, then dealing with Brenda's harassment would have been worth it. Life moved forward. Seasons changed. I got promoted to Deputy Chief of Operations for the entire Columbus region, a position that came with more responsibility, but also more resources to improve fire safety across the city. Meadowbrook Commons continued to thrive under its reformed HOA board. 2 years after the ice scraper incident, I was leaving for work on a cold January morning when I saw a moving truck at Brenda's old unit. Someone new was moving in. The unit had been rented out by the bank after the foreclosure. I wondered if the new residents knew the history of that particular unit. Probably not. It was probably better that way. Fresh start for everyone. As I drove to work, I thought about how a simple refusal to hand over an ice scraper had changed so much. It reminded me of something my first fire chief had told me years ago. Sometimes standing your ground on small things prevents bigger problems down the road. He'd been talking about enforcing fire codes even when building owners complained, but the principle applied here too. If I'd just given Brenda the ice scraper without question, if I'd paid the unjust fines without fighting back, she would have kept escalating. More residents would have been harassed. The embezzlement would have continued. By drawing a line at that first unreasonable demand, the whole corrupt system got exposed. The fire department kept me busy enough that HOA politics faded into the background of my life. But every once in a while, someone would recognize me from the news coverage and thank me for fighting back against Brenda. Or another HOA board member would reach out asking for advice about dealing with a problem situation. I always tried to help when I could. Not because I wanted to be some kind of HOA reform crusader, but because I understood how helpless people felt when facing abuse from an authority figure in their own neighborhood. If my experience could help someone else stand up for themselves, that seemed worth a few phone calls or emails. The ice scraper itself, still chipped and damaged, remained in my garage. I'd bought a new one years ago, but I kept the old one. Every time I saw it, I remembered that freezing rain, Brenda's entitled demand, and the choice I made to say no. It was just an ice scraper. But it represented something bigger. The principle that authority figures, whether they're running governments or homeowners associations, need to be held accountable when they abuse their power. And sometimes, it takes something small and seemingly insignificant to expose corruption and bring about real change. As I pulled into the fire station that morning, my radio crackled with reports of a kitchen fire on the north side. I grabbed my gear and headed out, ready to do what I'd trained my whole adult life to do, help people in crisis. But in the back of my mind, I knew that helping people took many forms. Sometimes it meant running into burning buildings. And sometimes it meant standing in the freezing rain and refusing to hand over an ice scraper to someone who had no right to demand it. Both required courage. Both made a difference. And in the end, that's what mattered.